The thunder of artillery rolled across the French countryside long before the soldiers appeared, shaking the earth as if the world itself were splitting apart. It was June 1944, only weeks after the Allied landings in Normandy, and the war that had once seemed distant was now sweeping across every field, forest, and village like a storm with no mercy. The sky hung low with gray smoke, and the air tasted of burned metal and damp soil. 17-year-old Eric Hartmann crouched in a muddy foxhole just outside the ruined village of Saint Marcel. His uniform clung to him, soaked with sweat and rain. His hands trembled around his rifle, the Kar 98K that had been issued to him only a month earlier, but it already felt like an extension of his arm, one he wished he didn't need. To his right, Jacob Witt adjusted the antenna on his battered radio pack. Jacob was 19, long-limbed and clever, the kind of boy who should have been studying mathematics instead of listening for tank engines in the middle of a war. To Eric's left, Otto Drexler crouched behind the MG-42 machine gun, feeding ammo into the weapon with practiced hands. Otto rarely smiled, and when he did, it came out more like a growl than a grin. War had done that to him long before it had even reached Eric. "American tanks are pushing from the west," Jacob muttered, pressing the headphones to his ears. "Shermans. And a lot of infantry." Otto let out a rough laugh. "Of course it's Shermans. They build them like toys. Break one, they send 5 more." Eric said nothing. He had never seen a Sherman up close, but the way veterans described them made his stomach twist. They were steady, relentless, and terrifying. A figure crawled along the trench, Lieutenant Weber. His helmet was dented. His coat was torn. His face was streaked with soot and exhaustion. "We hold this line," Weber said, his voice low and hard. "If we lose Saint Marcel, the entire sector collapses. Artillery is falling back. We buy them time. That's our job." He looked at each of them, even Eric, whose heart hammered against his ribs. "You boys want to live?" Weber asked. "Then fight smart. Move fast. And don't underestimate the Americans. They don't quit." As if summoned, a distant rumble echoed across the fields. It grew louder, heavier, closer. The Americans were coming. The first shells exploded at the edge of the field, dirt erupting into the air in violent bursts. Eric flinched, clamping his hands over his ears. Otto braced the MG-42. "They'll come through the hedgerows," Otto muttered. "Wait for it." The hedges exploded as American infantry burst through in waves, rifles raised. Behind them rolled 3 Sherman tanks, their turrets scanning left and right like hunters searching for prey. Gunfire exploded across the field. Otto opened up first, the MG-42 screaming its deadly high-speed roar. American soldiers dove for cover as bullets tore through the grass. Eric raised his rifle, sighted on a soldier sprinting toward a stone wall, and fired. The recoil slammed into his shoulder. Jacob shouted coordinates into the radio, and a moment later German artillery answered with thunder of its own, sending explosions rippling through the field. But nothing slowed the Americans for long. The Shermans rolled forward, firing shell after shell. One blast shattered the corner of the German trench, showering Eric in earth and debris. He coughed, blinked dirt from his eyes, and fired again. "Fall back to the second line," Weber shouted. Eric scrambled out of the foxhole, boots slipping in the mud. A shell exploded behind him, knocking him to the ground. Dust filled his lungs. He struggled to stand, but Jacob grabbed him and pulled him onward. They stumbled behind a half-collapsed stone wall just in time for machine gun fire to hiss over their heads. Eric pressed his back to the cold stone, chest heaving. "We can't hold them," he gasped. "We don't need to," Jacob said. "Just long enough." A roar cut through the chaos. Eric turned to see a battered Panzer IV crawling out of the treeline behind them. Its commander waved from the hatch. "Cover us. We'll take the Shermans." The Panzer fired, the explosion lighting the battlefield as its shells struck the lead Sherman. Flames burst from the tank side. The Sherman halted, smoke pouring from it. The second tank rounded to flank. The Panzer fired again, tearing into the second Sherman, crippling it. But the third tank returned fire, its shells slamming into the Panzer's turret and throwing sparks into the sky. The world became fire and smoke. Eric ducked as shrapnel whistled overhead. He could barely hear over the ringing in his ears. Jacob kept shouting into the radio, calling for support, but the line was unstable. Guns jammed. Otto yelled, slamming his fist against the MG-42. Eric's breath caught. Without the machine gun, the American infantry surged forward, 50 or more soldiers closing the distance with terrifying speed. One American raised a grenade. Another called out positions. Others fired from the hip as they advanced. Fall back. Weber roared. They ran. Eric grabbed Otto's sleeve, dragging him toward the forest. Jacob followed, firing his pistol wildly behind them. Branches whipped their faces as they tore through the trees. Gunshots echoed. Voices shouted. The glow of burning tanks lit the sky. Only when they reached a deep ditch did they collapse, gasping for air. We lost the village, Otto muttered. Lost everything. Not everything, Jacob replied. We're still alive. For now. But the forest was filled with retreating soldiers, some limping, some bleeding, some wandering like ghosts. The once disciplined German lines had become scattered clouds of exhausted men. They joined others trudging east through mud and fog. It felt like the whole army was shrinking, collapsing inward like a dying star. Americans won't stop, a nearby soldier whispered. They'll hit us again at dawn. Eric said nothing. He thought of home, of his sister's letters, of fields without smoke. But war had carved deep into him. Each battle aged him years. By midnight, they reached a rocky ridge. It had been hastily fortified by a group of German paratroopers who were already setting up machine guns. Their leader, Feldwebel Kruger, pointed to the right flank. U3, the valley. They'll come through there. Eric's legs felt like they were made of stone, but he moved into position with Jacob and Otto, taking cover among trees overlooking the fog-filled valley below. Hours passed in tense silence. Then a twig snapped. Eric stiffened. More snaps followed, soft, cautious. Shapes moved in the fog, barely silhouettes. American scouts. Otto fired first, cutting down the lead scout. Chaos erupted instantly. The valley exploded with gunfire. American soldiers dove behind rocks, firing upward. Muzzle flashes flickered like lightning. Eric fired until his rifle clicked empty. His hands shook as he reloaded. Bullets tore bark from trees around him. He heard movement, footsteps rushing along the right flank. A flanking maneuver. Otto! Right side. Eric shouted. But Otto was reloading and Jacob was pinned down. Eric ran. He slid behind a fallen log as bullets hissed past his face. He fired again and again, driving the flanking Americans back into the fog. The fighting dragged on. It felt endless. The Germans held the ridge, but barely. Men were wounded. Ammunition ran low. The fog grew thicker until Jacob was only a faint shape. Then Kruger shouted, "Tanks!" coming from the west. Eric felt the ground tremble. A deep rumble pulsed through the soil. Schumanns. Again. Jacob's voice broke. There's too many. A red flare shot into the sky, casting an eerie glow over the ridge. In that bleeding red light, Eric saw them. Dozens of American soldiers advancing in formation, 2 Shermans grinding over the valley floor. The ridge was going to break. The days that followed the breakout from the forest pressed down like years on the shoulders of every man who remained. Frost hardened the soil each morning, even though spring should have begun to melt it. The war did not care for seasons, and the cold felt like another enemy, patient and merciless. Martin walked in front of the small group now, not because he claimed leadership, but because the others naturally drifted behind him. He seemed the only one who could still think 2 or 3 steps ahead, even when hunger made thinking itself feel like another chore. Their clothes were torn from the blast, and the days spent crawling through underbrush. Dirt clung to their skin like another layer of fabric, and none of them remembered when they last felt warm. The noise of distant artillery never stopped. Like a grim clock, It marked the passing of time with explosions instead of chimes. Every man knew that sound meant the Soviet front was drawing closer, swallowing ground faster each day. On the third day of their march through the countryside, they spotted smoke rising from the ruins of a farmhouse. They froze, each man ready to run or fight depending on who stepped from behind the broken walls. But as they approached, they heard coughing, soft, uneven, frightened. A woman and 2 children were huddled inside. The roof of their home collapsed, the doors torn from their hinges. Martin was the first to step into view, but he raised his hands quickly to show he carried no weapon aimed at them. The woman's eyes were hollow, like someone who had cried herself dry. She looked at their uniforms and flinched. "Please, we have nothing," she whispered. "The soldiers already took everything." "We're not here for anything," Martin said. His voice cracked, and he cleared his throat. "We just need to rest a moment. Then we'll be gone." She studied their faces, exhausted, filthy, wounded, and something in her expression softened. Not quite trust, but the recognition that these soldiers were hardly a threat. She nodded once and motioned them inside. The children stared at the group with wide, frightened eyes. Leo offered them a weak smile, and for the first time in days, the corners of his mouth twitched upward as if he remembered that the world once held simple kindness in it. Inside the ruined farmhouse, the walls were still warm from the fire the family had built. The group sat on the floor, some leaning back against broken beams, others stretching their legs in relief. Martin glanced around the room and saw that even though almost nothing remained, the woman had carefully arranged what little she had left: a pot, 2 cups, a cracked bowl. In the middle of destruction, she preserved a sense of order, a last stand against chaos. "You should go west," the woman told them after a few minutes. "The Soviets came through here 2 days ago. They're headed south now. If you cut across the fields, you might avoid them." "Thank you," Martin said quietly. She turned back to the fire, her shoulders bending under the weight of a world torn apart. That night, they slept in the ruins, though each man took turns keeping watch. In the hours before dawn, when the sky was still slate gray, Martin sat awake near the broken window frame. The air outside carried the smell of burnt wood and distant smoke. He listened to the faint sounds of the countryside, wind brushing through the tall grass, the soft creaking of shattered beams cooling in the night air. He thought of his mother again, and shame clawed its way into his chest like talons. He imagined her lighting a candle for him, praying that her son, raised to be gentle, raised to fix things instead of breaking them, had not become a monster. He didn't hear Leo at first, not until the boy sat beside him with a sigh. "You think we'll make it?" Leo asked, not hiding the tremble in his voice. Martin didn't lie. "I don't know, but we'll try." Leo nodded, staring at his hands. "When it's over," he whispered, "do you think there'll be a way to go back to who we were?" Martin exhaled slowly. "Maybe not the exact same, but something close. Something better, maybe." The boy swallowed hard. "I hope so." The next day's march felt different, quieter somehow, as though the world held its breath. The skies remained heavy, clouds shifting like smoke across the horizon. Around midday, they spotted the tracks of tanks gouged deep into the soil, leading south. True to the woman's words, the Soviet column had already passed. They moved cautiously, avoiding open roads, keeping low through tall grass and abandoned fields. By evening, they reached the outskirts of a small town. Smoke curled upward from chimneys, but there was no sign of German forces. Instead, white cloths hung from windows and doors, signals of surrender. The toll of war lay visible in every face they passed: women carrying buckets of water, elderly men clearing rubble, children staring at these uniformed ghosts who still drifted through the broken landscape. A man with weathered skin and a cane stopped them near the town square. He regarded their uniforms with a guarded expression. "If you're looking for orders, you won't find any here," he said. "The war is over in everything but the official announcements. Best you boys disappear before someone decides you're not worth the trouble." Martin stepped forward. "We're just trying to get west," he said, his voice steady. The old man eyed him for a long moment, then pointed. "Follow the river road." Stay off the bridge. The Soviets blew half of it apart. There's a path through the woods that will take you around. The group continued, drifting like shadows past people who hardly looked up from their own suffering. A strange quiet pressed on them. They were soldiers without an army, fighting no one, belonging nowhere. The reality settled heavy on their shoulders. They were no longer part of anything except their own survival. When night finally came, they camped beneath a cluster of trees along the river. The moon cast faint light over the rippling water, turning it into a sheet of silver. They ate the last of the bread Leo had traded for earlier in the day. The silence between them felt less uneasy now, more like shared understanding. Around the fire's dying glow, Carl finally spoke, his voice rough. "I keep thinking about my little brother," he murmured. "He wanted to join the Hitler Youth so badly. Said it made him feel strong. I told him it was nothing but marching and shouting. But he joined anyway." He paused, rubbing his hands together. "I wonder if he's still alive." Jacob, who had hardly spoken since their escape, looked up. "I have a sister," he said quietly. "The last letter I got from home was months ago. I don't know if she's safe. I don't know if any of them are." Leo poked at the dirt with a stick. "We've all lost someone," he whispered. Martin listened, the guilt in his chest tightening like a rope. He felt responsible, not for the war, not for the country's collapse, but for these boys who looked at him as if he had answers. He didn't. He barely understood how he survived each day. But if they needed someone to trust, he could at least offer that. In the early hours of dawn, the crack of distant gunfire jolted them awake. They scrambled to their feet, listening. The shots weren't close, but they echoed across the river. Martin motioned for them to move. Staying in one place felt too dangerous now. They packed quickly and followed the river west, staying hidden among the trees. By midday, they encountered the remnants of a German convoy. Vehicles abandoned, tires ripped, metal twisted by explosions. Bodies lay covered by tarps, too numerous for burial. The boys walked past in silence, each of them averting their gaze, though they all felt the same cold dread sink deeper into their bones. The war had ended for these men. For Martin's group, the fight to stay alive continued. As they pushed farther west, the landscape shifted from fields to low hills. Smoke no longer hung in the air as densely, and for brief moments the world seemed almost peaceful. Birds chirped their cautious morning songs. A breeze carried the scent of pine instead of burning timber. It felt wrong, almost insulting, to find beauty in a land that still carried so much grief in its soil. Late in the afternoon, they reached a fork in the road. One path led toward a distant village, the other into dense forest. Martin paused, studying the horizon. If they went toward the village, they risked encountering Allied patrols, perhaps British or American forces pushing in from the west. But the forest offered no guarantee either. It could hide danger just as easily as protection. Village or forest? Leo asked. Martin scanned the sky, the road, the tree line, trying to sense the right direction. He felt the others watching him, waiting. "Forest," he said finally. "We're less likely to be seen." They walked for hours beneath towering pines. The ground was covered in thick needles, muffling their footsteps. The deeper they went, the more the forest swallowed sound. It felt like entering a world where the war could not follow, as if time paused between the tall trunks. But peace was never more than an illusion. In the late evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, they heard voices, gruff, accented, Russian. Martin froze, motioned for the others to duck behind fallen logs. Through the branches, they saw a small Soviet scouting patrol, maybe 6 soldiers, moving slowly and cautiously. One of them pointed toward the ground. Footprints. Martin's heart slammed. "They're prints," he whispered. "We move. Now." They crept deeper into the forest, staying low, breath ragged. But the Soviets were tracking them. Voices grew louder, boots crunching through underbrush, dogs barking in the distance. Panic took hold. The group broke into a run, branches whipping their faces, roots tripping their feet. Behind them, the shouts intensified. Gunfire cracked through the trees, bullets thudding into bark. Suddenly, Jacob stumbled, falling hard onto his knee with a cry. Martin grabbed him under the arms, hauling him up. "Move," he snapped. "I can't." "Yes, you can." Martin felt strength he didn't know he still had. "You can, Jacob." The boy limped, teeth clenched, eyes brimming with fear. But he moved. They reached a steep slope and slid down it in a rush, dirt and leaves spraying around them. At the bottom lay a shallow ravine with dense brush. Martin shoved the others into it and dropped down beside them, forcing his breathing quiet. The Soviets reached the ridge above moments later, their silhouettes dark against the fading light. One soldier aimed his rifle into the ravine, scanning. Martin didn't breathe. Then another called out, pointing to footprints leading in a frantic pattern further north. The rest of the patrol followed. Slowly, painfully slowly, the tension drained as the footsteps faded into distance. The group waited in absolute silence for nearly 20 minutes before Martin allowed anyone to move. When they finally crawled out, Jacob collapsed against a tree, shaking. Carl knelt beside him, inspecting the injury. It wasn't broken, just badly bruised. Martin rubbed sweat from his forehead, the fear still pulsing through him. "We can't stay here," he said, "but we'll rest a moment." Dinner that night was nothing more than scraps of dried root and a few berries Leo found. They drank from a stream running through the ravine. No one spoke for a long time, their minds still replaying the chase. Finally, Leo looked at Martin, his voice small. "I thought we were going to die." "So did I," Martin said. "But you didn't leave us." Martin shook his head. "I won't. Not ever." The forest grew darker, the night colder. They huddled for warmth, sharing coats and blankets that were already threadbare. Sleep came in restless waves, interrupted by nightmares and the constant fear of pursuit. Morning arrived with a pale sun that filtered weakly through the branches. Jacob's limp had improved slightly, though he still leaned heavily on Carl's shoulder. They followed a faint trail that wound upward, and by midday they reached an overlook. Below them stretched the western plains, vast, open, dotted with scattered farms but no signs of battle. And far in the distance, glimmering faintly in the light, lay the silhouette of an American armored column. Dozens of vehicles crawling across the countryside like metallic beetles. Martin's breath caught. The war had caught up to them from both sides. But the Americans were not the Soviets. Capture by them might not mean execution. It might mean survival, even if survival came with captivity. The other stood beside him, silent. Carl swallowed. "If we go down there, we'll be prisoners." "If we don't," Martin said, "we might not survive another encounter with the Soviets." Jacob gripped his crutch. "I choose life." Leo nodded slowly. "Me too." Martin stared at the distant American column, heart pounding. The path ahead terrified him, not because of danger, but because of uncertainty. What would become of them? Would they be tried? Imprisoned? Sent to work camps? Would his mother ever know he was alive? He took one last look at the forest behind them, then stepped forward. "Let's go," he said. They descended in careful steps, waving a makeshift white flag made from a torn shirt tied to a stick. The Americans saw them quickly. Guns trained on them, soldiers shouting commands Martin barely understood. They were ordered to lie face down. Rough hands searched them for weapons. Shouts and questions followed. But the Americans did not beat them. They did not shoot. They tied their hands, lifted them to their feet, and escorted them to the back of a transport truck. Inside the truck, the boys sat in silence. The war around them still rumbled, but for the first time in months, they were not running. Martin looked at his friends, exhausted, frightened, but alive, and felt something strange stirring inside him. Not victory, not peace, but the faintest possibility of a future. A life after the ruins. A chance to rebuild from the ashes. And for the first time since the world had begun to burn, he allowed himself to hope.